Hey friends, this is Marilyn from tarotclarity.com, and today I'm moving on with the A to Z Tarot series publications of tarot cards. And we're still on B, and we're concluding the B with Giordano Berti. How could we not include Giordano Berti? Now, I owe a lot to Giordano Berti because in the beginning, when I really was beginning to understand that there were some Italian decks that were available to me for purchase, because up until that point, I was thinking like I could only get whatever Lo Scarabeo was putting out, or US Game Systems. And, every time they put out a historic deck, they tended to change it or do something to it, And then at some point, I guess in the I don't know what year, early 2000s maybe, or mid 2010s or something like that, I became aware that there were Italian deck creators who were actually recreating the beautiful Italian decks. And so I learned about Giordano Berti and Il Meneghello, who of course I'll do later on. And that's how I got my hands on some wonderful Italian decks. Now, surprisingly, I only have 7 of Giordano Berti's decks. I don't have that many. And I thought I had more of his decks. So let me flip the camera. And I've done a video on each and every single one of them. So if you peruse my playlists, or you peruse, YouTube asking for any of these decks, you will find it in my playlist. In fact, I think I have a Giordano Berti playlist that I'll include down below, okay? So that you can access all of them. Now, do I recall which one I bought first? I would be willing to bet it was one of 2 decks. I would be willing to bet that my first deck that I purchased from Giordano Berti was either the Perrin or the Vernano. Now let me check their dates to see when he published them. I'm not sure when Giordano published either of them. Okay, so I peeked. The Vernano came out in 2014 and the Perrin came out in 2016. So unless one of these other decks is earlier, I will go on the assumption that this was the first Giordano Berti deck I bought. If you buy it directly from Giordano, he'll always include a very nice note. And Giordano's presentations are lovely. He always will include, information on that, the tarot in general. And then there's always something specifically on that deck. So there's always a little something in specifically, and then, in general, and then there's, advertisements for the rest of his work. Now, I don't typically always keep decks in order. And if decks are in order, then you know that it's not one that I use all that often. Or if it's in order, it means that that I was, probably going to use it for a video or something like that. Now, the thing about the Vernano, aside from the fact that the butterfly is the first time that a butterfly ever appeared in a full card, and we've seen it in other decks that have come since, but it was the first time. It was like a Piedmontese thing, now associated with Vernano for having done it first. The blousy kind of pants that he's wearing. But we do see, I think it's fair to say, that we see a certain amount of French influence, So the Italians invented the game of tarot, and we see this beautiful, very distinctive Ace of Cups, which we see in other Piedmontese decks, and I think maybe even sometimes, I think we might see it in some Swiss decks. I'm not absolutely positive, but I think so. But I think by 1830, I think that's when this deck came out. Yeah, 1830. By now, tarot had been reabsorbed into the Italian culture, having been influenced by other countries, particularly, I imagine, the French, right? So this although it holds on to, Italian notions or Italian, I guess you can say, traits or idiosyncrasies, we also see like French tradition with the lantern rather than the hourglass and stuff like that. Now, as far as cardstock, I have never riffle shuffled Giordano's decks. It's not to say that they can't be riffle shuffled, but I always kind of felt that they were more decks to have in a collection rather than to use. So I've used them, don't get me wrong. I've definitely used them, but I would have been more inclined to, oh boy, overhand shuffle the cards, these particular cards, rather than to riffle shuffle. That could just be me. Okay, so then I had learned about the Perrin tarot, and I loved it when I was doing my research, and the only one I could find was this like bar kind of deck that you could still get it. Who's it created by, in case you guys want it? The Alberto Peruso Editore. So it was published by Alberto Peruso, and it's kind of like kind of like a tavern deck. I don't know if they're still making it or not, but at the time I bought it, and it was just like a mass-produced kind of deck, and I loved it. But the registration of it is kind of off, and it's not because of the publishing house. It's because of the quality of the original plates, I guess they have, or the original cards or whatever it is that they used. But at any rate, I discovered that Giordano did this deck, and oh yeah, look at the moon. Oh, the sun. Is it the sun? Yeah, it's the sun with the pipe. I mean, this deck has a lot of cool stuff in it, which is why I wanted the deck. It had a lot of cool little things that made it unique. And when I learned that Giordano made a copy, I had to have it. And the registration on Giordano's is considerably better than the one that I have on the Tavern deck. But it's still, and it has nothing to do with Giordano's quality. It has to do with the original plates or whatever it is that they used, if it was an original deck, or I don't know if they had plates, I forget. But this is definitely a beautiful deck. A fun deck. I hope my Fool is in there. I didn't see it in the beginning. The problem with doing comparison videos sometimes is that unless I'm extremely careful, sometimes a card will accidentally get put in another deck. Ugh, I hate when that happens, and I'm wondering if that's what happened, but that's not your problem. I'll just have to hunt it down after this video. So I'm missing oh, there they are. There they are. Okay, and then in no particular order, I also, the first time I became aware of the Metelli, and those of you who know me know the Metelli is like my cherished deck, right? So then I became aware that there was this beautiful deck called Metelli, and I saw that Giordano had it, And I'm guessing that this one came after those other two. Let's see what the years are that he published this, 2017. So I had to have it because I was like, wow, this is such a beautiful deck. And it's, you know, it's not as early as the earliest tarot decks, of course. It's from the 1600s, I think. Let's see, what year does he give it? 1650 or something like that. Uh, 1660 to 1665. And I fell in love with this. Now, there are some differences in this one. Like, for example, cards 2 through 5 are different. And, but also just the, you know, the presentation of certain cards are different than what we expect to see, which is why I fell in love with the metallic. I just loved it. Oh, I should have remembered this one from Masha's death sequence. I forgot about it. Well, I forgot about it. I just can't always pick metallic for everything, but I love this deck. I just truly, truly, truly love this deck. But it only had, because it's a tarocchino, because any word in Italian that ends in ino means it's an abbreviated or diminutive term, which means less than, right? So it's missing cards from 2 to 5. So we skip from 1 to 6. And after falling in love with this deck, and I have Giordano Berti to thank for that, because he, you know, this was my first metallic deck. I just begged everybody who would listen, please create a full, you know, metallic deck. And I had 2 friends that did listen. I had Shell David, who created a deck for me and sent it to me. It's not for purchase, but he did create it. And then I guess at some point, you know, my friend Marco Benedetti also agreed that it was probably a great idea, so he did that as well. And so now I have that deck too. Then I have a few that were inspired elsewhere. We have the Tarot of Marseille, a German. Oh, here's another Italian. This one's Lando, which is Piedmont. Again, influenced by the French. So the French, you know, kind of came back to Italy. The influence of the French decks was kind of reabsorbed by the Italians. So it's a juicy deck. And then I have a few decks by Giordano that are German. So I have these 2 that are German. The Hess and the Miller. Oh, this is Besançon, excuse me. I thought it was German, though. But I mean, I thought this was produced by, a German. Yes, this is all German tarot. Okay, so it's a Besançon style, but it is German in nature. So German in origins, rather, like the creator. A very juicy deck. As I said, every one of these decks has gotten a video for it. And then I conclude with the Hess, which I love the Hess. The Hess was created in 1750, so it is an early one, early German. I guess it's considered early. I love the Hess because of the faces. They're so happy. They look like real people. That guy looks like, what was that actor's name? He usually played swine parts, like he was the uncle in High Society. He was Grace Kelly's uncle. He was also in something with Marilyn Monroe, like her uncle, in quotes. In, what was that called? Blackboard Jungle or something Jungle. I don't know if it was Blackboard Jungle, I forget, but something Jungle. Yeah, a lot of these faces remind me of people. But anyway. And I understand that Marco, and then I have another one that is the Foudras, which was Italian, I think, but in the style of, China, because China was becoming, around this period of time, think of, the Impressionist painters, and a lot of the painters were using motifs that they saw in art from the Orient, from Asia. And so a tarot deck was created in that vein. And here we have one such example, and I've done a video on this as well. And I have it on a good authority. I think earlier I just said Marco by mistake, but I meant Giordano. Has the Epinal. I believe he just published the Epinal, which I believe is available for purchase. And I already do have 2 copies of the Epinal. One by Grimaud, which I really think is rather ugly. And it's a miracle that I bought a second copy of it, to be honest. But you see, what I'm saying. You see what I'm talking about, right? But I had learned that Deviant Moon, this is going back a couple of years, Deviant Moon had a facsimile deck, and they just copied it, They just, reproduced it from their original deck. And it was much nicer than the Grimaud. And so I have every reason to believe that Giordano will do an outstanding job of making this as attractive as it can be. Because the Deviant Moon facsimile deck is pretty nice, and they didn't do anything to it except copy it, where Giordano features artistic, he'll do improvements to it, I think. Anyway, I don't think all his decks are just straight up. I don't think his decks are just straight up facsimile decks. I think he has a hand in some of them. I don't quote me, but I have a feeling because they're so beautiful. So I think that if I were to get the Epinal by Giordano Berti, it'll probably be the most beautiful Epinal that I have. I'm just on the fence about whether or not I want to buy a third Epinal. At any rate, I hope you enjoyed the video on Giordano Berti's work. Until next time, friend, peace. Be good to yourselves and others.